All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Guru Fantasy World. We have some good news and some bad news today. More bad news for me. You guys probably don't really care, but if you have heard or have seen or not seen me on Twitter, there's a reason for it. About, I think it was 1 week ago today, my account was accessed from a device in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and my email associated with the account was changed. I was locked out. I went and checked my emails, found these things. Was able to reset the password, but looks like two-factor authentication. It was enabled. Long story short, I can't get back in. Guru Fantasy World, I'm locked out of it. So we might have to do the, Jordan crying porn meme for Guru Fantasy World, RIP. So if you haven't seen me, that's why. I've converted the company page at Guru FFWRLD into a account number 2. So I'm still posting, but a lot of you probably aren't seeing it. So if you are missing me or wondering why, make sure you follow me at Guru FF World. We'll see if we get Guru Fantasy World back. I'm not super hopeful, especially because it seems like Twitter supports basically AI bots ever since Elon fired the entire human workforce. But we're filing a help ticket basically every week. So we'll see if we can get it back. If not, the show goes on. The good news is the show does go on, and we have a great guest coming on today. One of the, if not the greatest guest you could ask for, returning guest. You guys should know him by now. If you don't know him from Twitter and you're not following him, Ryan Heath Ryan J Ryan J _ Heath, right?
That's right.
Make sure you're following him because he's the best. He is our go-to statistician. He's probably the main dude who I'm citing in my newsletter on a weekly basis. Thank you for coming back on, Ryan. I know you're meeting us from, it looks like you said from a vacation or something. He's not at home, so he's going out of his way to come on. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly call this vacation, but yeah, I'm away from home. I'm at the beach with the family for a few days. I'm working through it regardless because
I don't know. It sounds like a vacation to me.
It's late July. Yeah, it's late July. Hard to take vacations that time of year with fantasy football. But yeah, excited to be on. Very excited to talk through all the work I've been doing this summer with you, David. So yeah, should be a good show.
Well, before we get to the football, I got to ask, which beach are you at? Because I know we're both in the same area, both New Englanders. I just came from the beach, so I'm curious.
Oh, yeah, I'm over at York, Maine. I'm at Short
York?
Sands,
Okay,
actually.
I just came from Saco. I was right down the strip on Old Orchard. So not too far. Yep, Maine beaches that time of year.
Yeah, there's a reason all us New Hampshire people drive up to Maine to go to the beach. It's not,
you having lobster
not
this week?
Nice anywhere else, of course. Yeah, I've had so much seafood. It's great.
Yeah, glad to hear that. You got to have the seafood. All right, no more seafood talk. Time to get to the football. So before we talk about the anatomy of a league winner, which is your most recent article and really what I want to focus on today, let's talk about your background a little bit in the fantasy space, your background just in terms of, your education and what your background is, just looking at it in terms of research articles as well. What kind of, I know you've done stuff on the stat correlations. Like I love those charts you post every year, which stats correlate to fantasy points year over year and which ones are most predictive. And it's almost always at the top you see last year's fantasy points. And I love that. Like the game really is simple. Obviously context matters and it doesn't just blanket apply to every player. Players change situations. We talk about age curves. That's another principle, that you've done a lot of research and you've posted a lot of articles on that. But a lot of times it's as simple as the guys who scored the most last year are probably going to score the most next year. So talk about that a little bit, and maybe if there's any other ones that I missed that kind of have informed your way of thinking in terms of the fantasy space.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll kind of start at the beginning of that. Educational background wise, I just have like a pretty normal degree in like economics and marketing. Nothing that was like crazy heavy on stats, but obviously was just like that teaches you to kind of understand what you're looking at with numbers and know what statistics mean. And probably nowhere else but in the fantasy football industry do you like so consistently see like very numbers and statistics heavy analysis that is just completely misapplied. So like kind of as you're talking about, a good example of this is let's just pick on running backs like I always do. Um, Running back efficiency numbers, for example, we always talk about, well, oh, this running back is really bad because his yards per carry is really low, his rush yards over expectation are really low. Like whatever your running back efficiency stat of choice is always like the way that we'll shit on like Kyron Williams usually, or whoever it happens to be that year. But I like to take a step back and say, okay, what are actually the stats that are the best at predicting fantasy points in the following season? And running back efficiency stuff, pretty much across the board, is terrible, right? And as you're saying, David, very often, like our biggest North Star should be just last year's fantasy points. That overall is one of the most predictive things. Volume for running backs is especially more predictive than efficiency stuff. Uh, and obviously, this will change at other positions, and we might get into some efficiency stats for some players we discuss today. But I think it's really important to know kind of what a stat means or what it's telling you when you're using it. Just because there is no like all encompassing stat that just tells you everything you need to know about a player. Like they are all tools in our toolbox. And I kind of, through my correlational analysis, through my series over at Fantasy Points called Statistically Significant, I kind of try to take people through a bunch of different stats that they might see me throw out, other people throw out, or whatever it may be, and just give like some context behind what does this stat mean? How can we use it for fantasy football if we can at all? And how predictive is it compared to just fantasy points or targets or what have you? So, yeah, that's kind of I guess that'd be one of my kind of core principles in the industry is just trying to give people more context and information about all these numbers that you will constantly see flying around on social media or in articles or on podcasts or what have you.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm really interested to dig into this anatomy of a league winner. I think there's some really cool information in here. So we're going to jump right into that because that's what I want to talk about is that article. So to me, the first thing is defining the anatomy of a league winner. So you have it defined, correct me if I'm wrong, as players who were on 55% or more of playoff rosters.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, ESPN every single year will just release all their data in terms of what percentage of leagues each player was on a playoff team in. So you can think of it as like a playoff win rate or a playoff rate or what have you. For like a default ESPN league, which is 10 teams with 4 making the playoffs, your average rate would be 40%. So going up to a 55% playoff rate is going to show you the players that really made a difference in terms of getting their teams into the playoffs. So yeah, whatever that is, like 1.4 or 1.5 times the rate of getting them into the playoffs.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, we're talking like week 1 to 14 here. This is like the sample of data. Like this is not defining league winners in 14 to 17. We're talking about players who are going to get you into the playoffs.
That's right. Yeah, and I just prefer to do it that way, just because the sample is bigger. Like you could also look at percentage of championship rosters that players get onto. ESPN also does publish that data. I prefer doing it this way just because a 14-week sample is a little bit better. And also, it's not going to be just as skewed over 3 weeks by whichever random like waiver wire guy hit big scores in week 16. So yeah, that's how I like to do it. There are definitely other ways to approach this, though.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We want to focus on the larger sample. 3 weeks is not enough to define, which players are the league winners. So, but it is something I want to clarify at the beginning because I do think it applies to some of the conversation we're going to have later. So another thing, we basically start at the distribution of league winners, right? We want to talk about which positions are the league winners the most. And we have very simple pie chart, which, even a monkey could understand this. So I love how it's very, very easy and simple numbers here. And the way the numbers break down, we have since 2017, 39% of league winners have been running backs, 30% have been wide receivers, 11% have been quarterbacks, and 11% have been tight ends. We also have 6% defenses and 3% kickers, which is crazy to me that we had league winner kickers. But I guess, hey, if you're one of those person who likes to draft the best kicker or whatever, or defense, I guess there's your data point. Take it and run with it. It's possible. You're saying there's a chance. I guess there is a chance. But mostly the way I look at this is the running backs, wide receivers, and quarterbacks and tight ends being about 10%. So talk about that distribution a little bit. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty intuitively, I think for people that have been playing a lot of fantasy football in their lives, this just shows and implies, well, running backs and wide receivers are by far the most important position in like a typical one quarterback fantasy league, right? Obviously, in Superflex, this would likely look very different. We don't have quite that data from ESPN leagues. If they did, I would love to look into it. But yeah, with these typical lineup settings, which is one QB, two running backs, two wide receivers, one tight end, and a flex in PPR scoring. Yeah, running backs are the most important position, a bit above wide receivers historically. And then both are just way better than quarterbacks and tight ends in terms of turning in those difference making seasons that are going to single handedly carry you to the playoffs. Um, I think there's kind of more of a debate between running back and wide receiver this year than that might imply, especially because over the last three seasons, we have seen those proportions kind of narrow a lot. There have been more league winning wide receivers than running backs in two of the last three seasons. As you might guess, last year had more running backs just with the health of that position and how unhealthy the wide receiver position was just in terms of injuries. But I do think there's a really good case to be made that we can see that swing back this year. I mean, only half of the wide receivers that we drafted as top 30 guys made it to 15 games last season. That was by far the lowest rate over the last decade. Running backs were the healthiest they've been over that period. So I really do think that at the very least, going with more of a balanced build and making sure you're getting wide receivers in the early rounds is going to be important this year. I definitely don't want to kind of overreact to just the health of each position last season.
Yeah, you kind of went ahead and answered my next question, which is kind of what I was going to get into, was the wide receiver versus running back specifically, because the overall data seems to imply running back is the position that's going to win you leagues a little bit more than wide receiver, which to me, obviously, we have to take into account the last couple of years. As you mentioned, injuries just were kind of way skewed towards wide receivers last year. But to me, it really reiterates that you want to anchor with at least one running back early and just not really ignore that position as a whole early in your drafts. It's fine to go light running back, but I want to grab a running back in the first four rounds just because of that league winning upside, which is kind of the next question or segment we have here is, where are these positions going? Where are the league winners being found? And we have this, again, very handy chart here. So one takeaway here is if we look at the first four rounds, right? So running backs and wide receivers in the first four rounds, you have at running back 18%, 24% for round two, 20% league winner rate for round three, and 19% league winner rate for round four, which, and just to define that, that means 18% of the running backs selected in round one end up becoming league winners. 24% of the running backs in round two end up becoming league winners. 20% of the running backs selected in round three end up becoming league winners, and 19% of the running backs in round four end up becoming league winners. So we're getting about 20% league winner rate all through the first four rounds. And to me, what I see there is round three and round four actually have a higher league winner rate than round one for running backs. So we have 18% in round one, Round 3 and round 4, you have 20 and 19% league winner rate. So you're still getting league winners through round 4 at running back. Once we hit round 5, it drops to 11%. Once we hit round 6, it drops to 8%. Round 7 through 9, it's like 0%. That's kind of our dead zone. Wide receiver, on the other hand, you look at the first 2 rounds, 21%, 21%. Very similar to running back, where we're in that 20% range the first 2 rounds. But then you look at round 3 and round 4, we dropped to 5% and 11%, around 5, 6, 7, 9, 6, 3%. And then there's basically like no league winners after round 7 at the wide receiver position. You get like 4% in round 11. There's basically 0% down the board after that. So I look at the first 4 rounds where if you pair 2 running backs in the first with 2 wide receivers in the third and the fourth, you're getting 18, 24%. So about 20% the first 2, but then only about 5 to 10% in round 3 and 4. If you flip it and you go wide receiver, then running back, you're getting 20% league winner rate the whole first 4 rounds. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about your early round strategy. What do you like to do in the early rounds?
Yeah, I think you nailed that pretty much. This was also one of my bigger takeaways, which is, yeah, by far your best chance to get the league winning wide receivers has just been in rounds 1 and 2. The rate just falls off so quickly after that compared to every other position. So yeah, that's a great argument to go a little more wide receiver heavy in rounds 1 and 2. And I do think that this year in 2025, because obviously this is historical data, it's not always going to be the same, but this year I do think ADP kind of aligns like this as well. You are able to get guys like a Chase Brown, like a Breece Hall, like a Ken Walker in these rounds 3, round 4 ranges that maybe we'll talk about them in specific later, but these are some of my like favorite running backs to click. Like these guys have incredible league winning upside to me, just with all of their receiving profiles and so many other things about those running backs that attract me to them. And so, yeah, it makes me a little more interested in saying, okay, I'll get my wide receivers in the first couple rounds just because there's such a great pocket of running backs there in rounds 3 and beyond. But yeah, I think kind of the way to think about this, or maybe like the reason for this, is number one, we have seen running back ADPs in general slide, especially over the last few years. We're drafting fewer and fewer running backs in the first couple of rounds. So naturally, it makes sense that some of the good running back profiles are now available later than they would have been, especially like 10 years ago in the insanely like running back centric world we used to live in terms of the fantasy football market. And number 2 is kind of going back to what I was saying about like the correlation of running back stats year over year. We're a lot better at knowing who the good wide receivers are in the NFL at any given time. And that's because wide receiver efficiency stats have really good correlations to next season fantasy points or target share or whatever it is, right? Yards per route run or first downs per route run or any stats like that at the receiver position are way better at giving us an idea of who are the best receivers in the league. And especially the last few years, we've rightfully drafted all of those guys in the first couple of rounds. You contrast this at running back where it's a lot harder, just from like a statistical perspective, to definitively say, okay, these are the best running backs in the league. Coaches have a much greater impact on a running back's fantasy production than that of a wide receiver. I'm thinking of like the year that Austin Eckler, through his entire career up to like 2021, had never really gotten red zone work. One season, he gets red zone touches and he's instantly fantasy football's RB1 overall, right? Ken Walker, over the first 2 years of his career, was just never targeted. They bring in head coach Mike McDonald. They bring in the new OC, Ryan Grubb, and he's top 5 in the NFL in target share, right? Like these coaches just all have very different preferences and ways of using running backs, and that kind of can have like a much greater impact regardless of their talent on their fantasy production. And that's harder to predict. So therefore, it is easier comparatively to just say, well, take the good wide receiver, he'll probably figure it out. But to want to kind of find these gems at running back based on some of like reading the usage tea leaves is a lot more viable to do past the first couple of rounds. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm pretty much always trying to get at least one wide receiver through the first 2 rounds. And then, yeah, that round 3, 4 is where I really love getting my running backs.
Yeah, we're definitely aligned there. And I love some of the names you brought up. Kenneth Walker, I could go on and on about Kenneth Walker all day long. He's along with Alvin Kamara, who I would throw in there, who I know kind of goes against your age curve background there. But I'm still drafting Alvin Kamara. The guy has consistently been top 5 running back, never finished below RB14 in his entire career. But Kenneth Walker, I mean, you take away the last game he was injured in last year, he averaged 17.2 points. That's the same as Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs. These guys are going in round 2. You can get Kenneth Walker at the 3-4 turn. He's a guy who is going to be a staple of my draft strategy this year. I'm not trying to predict injuries. I'm just going to pray and hope, because any one of these running backs can get injured. Every year, it's tough to tell. Every year, it's like, I remember when just people were all against, it was JT. Then JT got hurt. And it was like, oh, all in on CMC. CMC gets it. You never know which one's going to be the next guy to domino to fall. So when you have a guy like Kenneth Walker and you look at the way he can run the ball, he's second in the league in missed tackles forced since he entered the league, behind only Derrick Henry. Last year, only Derrick Henry and Bijan had higher PFF rushing grades. And then you talk about the receiving ability that he flashed here. Only Alvin Kamara and Devon Achane averaged more targets per game than Kenneth Walker at the running back position. So we're talking about top 3 graded rusher, top 3 in terms of targets per game. This guy's being drafted at like RB outside the top 12, like RB 15 or something like that. So I'm all in on Kenneth Walker. I'm curious in terms of your wide receiver targets, because we've talked about, if we are picking a wide receiver in round 3 or 4, it's probably only about a 5 to 10% chance versus a 20% chance at running back. So for me, a guy would be Rashee Rice, who, we talk about. He was a 2nd-round pick before all this, arrest news, where now he's got to go to jail. Who knows what the suspension is going to be, when it's going to be. But if it turns out in his favor, where maybe it's 2 games, 3 games, not 4 to 6, maybe it's 3 games like Alvin Kamara last year, and we get this guy back from week 4 on as a 4th-round pick, like, he's a guy I'm still drafting in that range for sure. Like, I'm looking at the season-long upside, and maybe he doesn't hit 55% playoff rate, but, he's going to be a guy I'm going to want in weeks 14 through 17. So are there any other wide receivers, like if you had to pick a guy in the round 3-4 range who you would want to draft and think has league-winning upside?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that round, Rashee Rice aside, like wherever his ADP ends up settling, that round 3 to round 4 range is really rough for me at wide receiver. Like, I really do think it's kind of like just a big tier of like 20 or so guys. I wouldn't say that either of these players have league-winning upside, but the ones I'm clicking most are just Devontae Adams and Mike Evans, because I think they give you fairly strong medians. But we've never had a league-winning wide receiver past age 32, which is right where these guys are. So I'm not really just targeting receivers in that range. I guess the closest to this range that for a guy that I'm into, at least on Underdog, because he goes in round 4, would be Tetero and McMillan. So kind of the thinking here is we have seen through so many seasons of fantasy, going back to 2010, and this is from Ron Store on Twitter, there have been 21 different rookie wide receivers that have gone over 16 fantasy points per game in the second half of the season, right? We just consistently underdraft these guys. That is changing on some of the sharper platforms. I think McMillan goes pretty close to where he probably should on Underdog. But in a lot of these like managed league platforms, like just your ESPN home league or Yahoo or what have you, he is going much, much later than that. He's just very obviously should be higher than a round 6 or round 7 pick on those platforms. So I really like McMillan. He just kind of will perfectly step into this Dave Canales X receiver role. where basically what Canales does is he likes to have an outside X receiver that he funnels a ton of volume to. I mean, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson have combined to be the wide receiver 11 in expected fantasy points per game over the last 2 seasons under Canales. And what he'll like kind of uniquely do is these guys will line up outside, but they'll run all of these in-breaking routes over the middle of the field, all these horizontal breakers, which is kind of an efficiency cheat code, especially for outside receivers that are often kind of running vertically downfield more. Think like all your issues with Rome Odunze and Marvin Harrison last year. It's because they're not getting like these horizontally breaking routes. But Evans and Deontay and any Dave Canales X receiver always runs a ton of those, and it's just a total cheat code. So yeah, I really like McMillan where he's going. I think he has wide receiver 1 upside as early as his rookie season. And yeah, especially down the stretch, we've seen, as I said, we've seen so many of these guys have just these outsized impacts.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good names there, especially we talked about, like, if we're talking early round 3, Devontae Adams. I think another aging wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, obviously, if he slips into the 3rd round, he's a guy I'm definitely clicking. Guy had 1,700 yards his first 2 years in Miami before last year, so he has that league-winning upside in round 3. And I think McMillan, that's kind of why I wanted to clarify at the beginning of the show, like what we're using to define the league-winning parameters, because he's going to look better week 9 through 17 than he is going to look week 1 through 14. The numbers are just going to be skewed towards that direction. Just historically speaking, rookies, they're going to be on average better in that second half of the season. So I think that's another thing that when we're looking at the wide receiver position and we're looking at this chart where, okay, maybe it says 0% league winner from round 8 on at wide receiver. That doesn't necessarily mean draft 0 wide receivers from round 8 on. It just means those guys are probably not going to be power players week 1 through 14 in terms of getting you to the playoffs. But we can look at those playoff weeks and those second half of the seasons. Another guy who comes to mind would be Jaden Reed. And this is because I had him on my best ball team ever finish. I think it was Dalmatian. It was his rookie year. And ended up getting to the finals, and he had a big week 17. Was he a guy who was on 55% of playoff rosters? Absolutely not. But he's a guy who had caught like 6 for 89 and 2 touchdowns week 17, where you're getting those skewed performances. So it is okay to draft wide receivers. Like I'm still drafting Luther Burden in round 10 plus, even though this chart just says 0% league winner rate. Like it's not just a binary thinking in terms of looking at these numbers and being like, all right, I don't draft any wide receiver after round 10. Like, it's not that simple. Even though we do look at the running back position, you're still getting round 10 through 14, 5%, 0%, 7%, 8%, 7%. You're going to get more big hits there in terms of if you do hit in terms of league winners, but it doesn't mean just draft, 6 straight running backs around 10 through 16 or whatever it is.
Yeah,
it's important
and
to have
it's for the same reason we were just talking about too. It's because running backs can put up league winning seasons just by contingent value, right? If they were going late, like some of these league winners have
Charbonnet,
like more handcuff types, but even guys in like the very ambiguous backfields, like Raheem Mostert a couple years ago when we were drafting all 3 Dolphins running backs very late, and Mostert was the one that hit the hardest, at least in the early part of the season, right? But yeah, with receivers, we just know who the good ones are. It's a lot easier. There's not as much value transferred from a wide receiver to another one when one gets injured. So yeah, it makes sense to me that we see more of the late round running back hits. But yeah, as you said, I think you can still pick your spots. Like I'm really happy to be drafting the Jaden Reeds and the Luther Burdens and the Emeka Igbukas kind of in those middle late rounds at wide receiver.
Yeah, so I want to shift the conversation away from the running backs and the wide receivers a little bit towards, let's start with the quarterback position, because one thing that's very intriguing about this chart, we talk about the first 4 round strategies, right? Like we want to start wide receiver, running back. But you also have these elite quarterbacks in round 3 and 4, and this is by far the highest league winner rate other than a round 2 tight end, where basically it was a 50% of the tight ends drafted in round 2 turned out league winners. It was basically just Travis Kelce. That's
Yeah,
basically
literally all of those are Travis Kelce.
he's
Yeah.
the only one who was ever drafted in round 2. So that's all that stat really tells us. It doesn't really tell us a ton about the position as a whole. But we look at these round 3 and round 4 quarterbacks. Round 3, 40% of the quarterbacks drafted in round 3 went out to become league winners. 33% of the quarterbacks drafted in round 4 went on to become league winners. So you're getting almost double the league winner rate versus running backs in round 3 and 4. And talk about quarterback versus wide receiver. That's 40% versus 5%, 33% versus 11%. So to me, that's like, hey, you should be taking Lamar Jackson over Marvin Harrison Jr. You should be taking Jaden Daniels over Xavier Worthy, that kind of thing. That's my takeaway for it, is that if you're going to take an elite quarterback, it should be over one of these wide receiver 2 types, because there's still the running backs that are 20%. So if I'm going to pass up one of those quarterbacks, I want to be taking one of those running backs, or maybe a George Kittle, a guy who I had, we look at the tight end position where you have 14% rate in the 3rd round. So it's not totally out on early tight end, if the guy's there, especially if he falls to 4th round. But I don't mind starting running back, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, tight end. Like, I'm fine with that strategy. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I mean, to start with the early quarterbacks, it's honestly even more dramatic than you just kind of sold it as. So if you just look at the last 3 seasons and you take 3 guys, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, uh, since 2022, those 3 quarterbacks have gone 5 for 6 at being a league winner when they were drafted in rounds 3 or 4. That's an 83% hit rate if you're just drafting one of those hypermobile quarterbacks in round 3 or in round 4. So that should be tempting to you, of course. It's the easiest way to quote unquote guarantee that you have at least one league winning player on your roster. And I think so, especially in leagues that are only 10 teams, makes a lot of sense to just click an elite quarterback, because you have much more room to kind of catch up at the other positions after that. Same thing if you're in like a home league that you feel does not have insanely great competition. It can be really effective to just take one of the easiest bets off the board if you can get access to one of those hypermobile QBs in round 3 or 4. Just because if your league mates are going to be worse at finding non-quarterback league winners, then you should take one of those guys away from them. But despite kind of the huge gulf in those rates between quarterback league winners and running back or wide receiver league winners in those early rounds, that doesn't mean that you should always take a QB in the early rounds, right? Because there are levels to being a league winner, right? If you just look at value over replacement, so just the points per game that the RB1 averages above the RB20 in an average year, and compare that to the QB1 versus the QB10, the running backs are always putting up much higher values over replacements. Like it's a bigger hit to get one of the top running backs than it is to get one of the top QBs. So yeah, with that in mind, and also, of course, with still the relative success of the late round quarterback strategy, even over the last few years, I do think it can make sense to say, well, in these larger leagues with more teams, in more competitive leagues, it can be advantageous to just say, I really want that extra shot at a difference-making running back in one of the only rounds where they've historically been available, and I'll figure out quarterback at the end of the draft and spend nothing on it. I do think that's also totally viable. But yeah, it's very much like a barbell strategy with quarterbacks that I would take. Is either you should draft one of those 4 elite guys early, or you should just wait until the end of the draft and take like a Drake May or a JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, I wouldn't say totally then, but you look at the quarterbacks, we have that 11, 12, 13 round range. We're still at 10%, 10%, 17% becoming league winners. So, like you said, there's still that viable late round quarterback strategy that didn't just come out of nowhere. But I think, especially talk about the mobile quarterbacks, that kind of cheat code has been discovered, and we're just not seeing those guys that are hypermobile sliding that far. Justin Fields is a guy who comes to mind. Drafting a lot of him in that range if he's there, round 10, round 9. I think you could include him as possibly being one of those cheat codes. Drake May is another guy who talk about that rushing upside. There's other guys, Kyler Murray. Everybody was all in on him last year. He still has that ceiling. He's shown us 20+ point per game ceilings before. So I still think there are guys where if you do wait, you can still find viable potential league winning quarterbacks late. But if I am drafting in round 3 or 4 and I'm not taking one of those elite quarterbacks, I really feel like it should be for one of those running backs, for a Kenneth Walker, for a Breece Hall, for an Alvin Kamara, for a guy who can really give that big boom like you're talking about. Whereas the wide receivers, I'm like, you look at almost every guy in that range, they're not even the number one wide receiver on their team. Like we talk about Xavier Worthy, he's not going to be the number one once Rashee Rice is back. It's unlikely at the very least. We talk about, George Pickens, Jalen Wallen, Devontae Smith, like those guys in that 4th-round range, even the 3rd-round range, DJ Moore. I'm like, is he even the number one on his team? Mike Evans, is he even the number one on his team? DK Metcalf's a guy who I'm like, I see the upside case this year where I'm like, all right, I could easily see it just being another overhyped, and he's just another wide receiver 2 finish. But I do see, okay, what if Aaron Rodgers is not completely washed the way he supported Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson last year on the same team? There are really no other targets there, so there's potential for average to above average quarterback play with a consolidated number one wide receiver target share. So I do like him in that range if I was going to pick someone other than Rashee Rice. If I really don't want to draft a wide receiver there, I want to take a quarterback. I want to take George Kittle. If he's there, I want to get that tight end. But let's bring it to the tight ends a little bit because we talk about the strategy here as well. There's really no takeaway for round 2 tight ends because it was all Travis Kelce. But we're still getting league winners and 14% in round 3, 7% in round 5, 18% in round 6. So it's not completely off the board. But then you look at the notion that you can just wait until your last pick to pick a tight end. Rounds 12 through 17, we still have 9%, 0%, 10%, 0%, 6%, 8%. So we're up above 5%, like 5 to 10% in that range. You're still getting some league-winning, quote-unquote, tight end. So what's your tight end strategy in 2025? What are you trying to do?
Yeah, so my biggest tight end take is I'm not drafting either of the top 2 guys, Brock Bowers or Trey McBride. They both go in like round 2, early round 3 in best ball, pretty similar ADPs in ESPN and managed platforms. I'm just not touching either of them because one of the biggest takeaways that I had from this article and from a standalone tight end article I wrote earlier in July is that over this 8-year period since 2017, no tight end has been a league winner when they've been drafted inside the first 4 rounds, aside from just Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is very clearly washed now, goes far beyond that range. So it is a bit of a leap. It's a bit of an assumption to say, okay, I think there's another tight end in the league right now that is as special and talented as Travis Kelce. This is nothing against Brock Bowers. I think Bowers is freaking awesome. I think he's weirdly undervalued in like dynasty tight end premium stuff. I don't really get why he is so available at the turn in those formats, but goes early round 2 in non-tight end premium. It makes no sense to me at all. It's kind of similar take with McBride. Love him at where he goes in tight end premium stuff. But yeah, if there's not a tight end premium, it almost never makes sense to draft a tight end over a running back or wide receiver that can be projected to outscore them. And that is most of the wide receivers and running backs in rounds 2 and 3 are easily projectable to outscore Bowers and McBride. The only way that Kelce was a league winner from these early rounds was averaging like 18 fantasy points per game in PPR formats in those seasons, right? That he was literally scoring as a wide receiver 1. People think that Brock Bowers did that last year. I am not really sure why. There were 20 wide receivers that averaged more underdog fantasy points per game than Brock Bowers last year. I don't know how this myth has been so permeated that Bowers is just already like a fantasy wide receiver one. That's not the case. Uh, could he take a step? Maybe. I don't love how this Raiders offense kind of sets up for him, just in terms of pace of play concerns with Chip Kelly being a much slower play caller at Ohio State last year. Just what I'm expecting to be a reduced amount of garbage time if this Raiders offense is any more efficient. Bowers led the NFL in fantasy points while trailing in the fourth quarter last year. So the projection doesn't come together for Bowers on with me. It doesn't quite come together with Trey McBride to the point where I ever think it makes sense to click those guys over a Chase Brown or like a Lad McConkey versus Brock Bowers 1v1 is pretty easily lad to me. So yeah, I am anti early tight ends this year. I love George Kittle. He's kind of on like right on the cusp of that like round 4 area in most drafts. He outperformed both McBride and Bowers last year. He averages like over 18 fantasy points per game without Deebo Samuel over his career. Like just so many reasons to think that George Kittle could destroy this year. He's clearly the one I'm drafting of those three. And then, yeah, I have several targets really through the middle and later rounds. Very big on David Njoku, very big on Colston Loveland, just being this year's Sam Laporta, which would make all the sense in the world. So yeah, I think like my biggest thing at tight end is I am not paying up for the 2 elite tier tight ends in 2025. And maybe Bowers like destroys me and completely makes me look like an idiot for this take. I think that's possible. I have MVP long shot bets on him just in case that happens, because I do think there's a world. But yeah, just playing the probabilities, I don't really like the opportunity cost of Bowers right now.
Ryan, we have been aligned the entire show, but you could not have chosen a worse podcast to come on to talk shit about Brock Bowers. We could not be further apart here. First of all, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Brock Bowers is supremely better than Travis Kelce was at any point in his career. And I am confident in saying that, not just from one NFL season, we're talking about the 5-star prospect profile. We're talking about what he produced as a true freshman at Georgia. Just at every point, he has had that generational tag, and at every point, he has lived up to the hype. He was a rookie last year. Devontae Adams was also on this team for the first 7 weeks. No slight to Jacoby Myers, who I respect, feel is underrated. He is not a Devontae Adams level target earner. You remove Devontae Adams from the situation. You also insert Geno Smith at quarterback, who I feel is also supremely underrated. You look at Geno Smith in 2024, 4th in passing yards, 5th in completion percentage, 8th in adjusted completion percentage, 13th in yards per attempt, 14th in big-time throw percent, QB9 in PFF passing grade, QB8 in PFF passing grade under pressure, 2nd in game-winning drives. This guy is legit quarterback. This is light years ahead of what Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell were putting on tape last year. We're talking light years ahead of it. And now we talk about going into year 2. I don't care about Pete Carroll never having a tight end to catch 100 player to catch on. I don't give a shit about that narrative. Chip Kelly, to me, I'm not scared of Chip Kelly. I'm not using him as a reason to fade Brock Bowers. To me, he is that round 2 Travis Kelce, where if you take him in round 2 throughout his career, is a 50% chance he's a league winner. The history's telling you right there. 50% chance Travis Kelce was a league winner if he was selected in round 2. That's what Brock Bowers is. You got a 50% chance that guy is going to be a league winner. You should not be full, especially for guys like Lad McConkey and Chase Brown. I mean, give me a break. Like, we have a very small sample on Chase Brown even being an above average talent, never mind volume earner. They certainly did not want to give it to him early in the season. Zach Moss got injured and he went off. But that's I've gone down the Kenyon Drake road before. It doesn't always work out when you say, oh, he was great for 8 weeks. He was so good for 9 weeks. You know, Brock Bowers has been good his entire freaking life. Chase Brown was good for 8 weeks. I am not taking Chase Brown over Brock Bowers. Not if you put a gun to my head. Pull the freaking trigger. Take me out. I am not taking Ladd McConkey. I've been on record. He's good. I feel we're kind of getting Chris Olave here a little bit. Came in as a really developed player. Is probably gonna is much better quarterback situation. I expect a leap in year two, but is he gonna be that guy where he's gonna be a league winner in round two? I'll take my 50% chance on Brock Bowers. That's for sure. I think the case against Brock Bowers in round two is what you said. It's the value at the tight end position later in drafts where we look at David Njoku, who's been like a top 5 guy, Mark Andrews. You're picking him versus, like handcuff running backs in the range they're going, especially talk about underdog. Like, it's Mark Andrews versus Jordan Mason or Zach Charbonnet. That's a pretty damn easy bet to wait on tight end there and take the running backs and the wide receivers early in the first 2 rounds. That's the case against it. It's a roster construction thing to me. But all the other points, I'm not on board with that. I am buying the Brock Bowers. I'm buying into the upside. So we're going to disagree on that one. Any rebuttals? Because I know I just went off on you before I changed topic.
No, you're good, man. Yeah, no, I think just the biggest thing to me is just going to be team pass volume. So I know we think of the Raiders as like a really terrible offense from last year, and that's true in most respects. But they had the 3rd most dropbacks. They were, I believe, they were 6th in total catchable targets available to their receivers. I just expect a much run heavier approach, and maybe that is very likely to be a more efficient approach. And I'm with you on I do not care about Pete Carroll tight end history or anything like that. That is totally immaterial to me. But yeah, it's just if Bowers is like a 95th percentile talent in this offense and what we're kind of projecting it as, he's probably like a 15, 16 point per game player. That's not going to kill you, but there's an opportunity cost there to getting more at these other positions. If Bowers is the greatest tight end to ever walk the face of the earth and he is just absurdly efficient and he goes for 13 touchdowns on a mediocre offense and just completely carries them, then yeah, maybe I will look stupid. But I mean, yeah, only Travis Kelce has ever been good enough to make me look stupid on this take. So I'm fine just fading Bowers and managed. But yeah, as I said, I think he should be like the 8th or 9th overall most valuable player in like Dynasty Superflex stuff, where just the scoring gulf does not exist yet. I keep getting him at the turn in Dynasty Titan Premium. So yeah, it's very, very weird, like between the 2 formats, how different, or how, I guess, like how people apply the Brock Bowers is so amazing take compared, like in the format that it actually would benefit you way more. People just don't seem as gung-ho on it.
Yeah, he's not going to make you look stupid no matter what. Even fading him, you're well reasoned in your take, and you're not just doing it because you have a gut feeling. You're supported by data. So even if he goes off, we will forgive you, Ryan. You're not going to look stupid, so you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, I think we're a little bit apart on that, which I don't think is going to surprise anyone, as I've always been an early tight end drafter. I've never been against it. I've been for it more extremely at certain times than other. I do feel this year is an extremely good year to go late round tight end. I really, especially in best ball, like I'm really just building with Mark Andrews late. I'm building with David Njoku late, Evan Ingram. Like I'm getting Tucker Kraft, like outside the top 12 tight ends. You talked about Colston Loveland. I'm drafting the other rookie tight end, Tyler Warren, who I think is just has supreme upside to potentially be the number 1 target earner on his offense in the first year. I could see 70 plus receptions, 75, 80 plus receptions, and potentially, some sort of manufactured rushing role. We could see him throwing passes out of the Wildcat. So he has that upside to be, if I'm trying to choose a league winner in the late rounds, it would be a guy who's already done it, like Andrews or Njoku or maybe an Ingram. If not, it's going to be Tyler Warren for me. He's the guy who I would flag plant. But yeah, this is a good year. So I think your take there, construction wise, against Bowers early, it's definitely supported in that way. So I'm not even fully against the stance you have there, but I am just a Brock Bowers stan. So we're gonna finish on that. I don't think we have. Oh, I guess round 10 or later. Let's see. let's just talk about that real quick, because I don't want to hold you all day here. But that is one more topic I wanted to cover real quick, because we talk about the late round, strategy where you still have quarterbacks available 11 to 13, 10%, league winner rate, still get some of those contingent running backs. You have those tight ends. Do you have any particular players or any particular strategy that applies to round 10 and later this year where you're doing a certain thing?
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing is at quarterback, like the easiest advice I can just give here, which is, yeah, I mean, in the past, we've always said, okay, the late round quarterbacks, the ones with the Konami code upside, the rushing floor and ceiling are the ones you want to target. That is still kind of true, but as you mentioned earlier, David, it just increasingly these running quarterbacks are being pushed up into the early and middle rounds. So it's a lot harder to find that profile later in drafts. I've already mentioned Drake May. He's an obvious one. But aside from that, there's not like that much rushing appeal kind of among these late round quarterbacks. So a really easy pivot to make, and this will apply especially to Superflex, but also to 1QB leagues if you just want to draft a guy in one of the final couple rounds and plan to stream the position if it doesn't work out. The easiest way to hit on a guy that's at least close to a league winner or one of the biggest ADP values of the season, all of those guys have been pocket passers very specifically in what I call a Mick Shanahan offense. So a play caller that is from either the Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay coaching tree. That they do kind of similar things in terms of supporting quarterback production, promoting efficiency with play action, with condensed formations, with pre-snap motion, with all of like the sharp, good play calling tricks, basically that work in the NFL today. But yeah, all of the big hits from the late rounds since 2020 have just been pocket passers in those offenses. So I already said his name earlier. JJ McCarthy is kind of the most obvious one to me this year. I mean, we've seen Kevin O'Connell's teams ranked top 5, top 6 in pass rate over expectation and red zone pass rate every single year he's been a head coach. We've seen like Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins, like average QB1 fantasy numbers in this system. Sam Darnold was thought to be one of the worst quarterbacks or one of the biggest draft busts in the last decade or so. And then he had a QB1 season last year in this offense. They've only upgraded the interior of the offensive line. Like JJ McCarthy is just a total smash in every format right now. He has been all summer. But yeah, just at any of these Mick Shanahan teams, I just love taking shots on their quarterback slate.
Yeah, so JJ McCarthy is a good one. I'm drafting him a lot too, and I think Josh Dobbs is a good name you brought up, because it's not just Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold, and that's kind of the argument used against McCarthy as well. Darnold was playing at an MVP level last year, like it's a high bar. I think McCarthy is. You look at Josh Dobbs; he was top 12 in points per game as a starter in Minnesota. McCarthy's a little bit underrated as a rusher, and kind of more on Dobbs level in terms of the spectrum of scrambling ability. He's probably not a Konami code rusher, but he is capable, and he is gonna probably add a little bit, certainly more than Kirk Cousins did as a rusher. I would say probably a dash more than Sam Darnold, even though they're probably going to want to be careful with their first year starter. So I don't imagine them using him in a ton of like manufactured rushes for McCarthy. I think we're going to see that more later in his career than in year one. But I do think, again, he's being drafted at a reasonable price. If you're targeting someone in the late rounds, you want a guy who has some rushing ability and probably in good offense, and he fits both of those molds. Are there any other pocket passer quarterbacks in the McShanahan systems off the top of your head who you're drafting this year?
Jordan Love would probably be the other big one. And this is definitely more of like a best ball take where you have to do these 2 or 3 quarterback builds, or obviously in Superflex. But yeah, Love in his 5 starts before his week 8 groin injury was top 5 in pass attempts per game, pass yards per game, I believe over 20 fantasy points per game last year. They totally changed the offense after week 8. With his groin injury. He also had a couple other lower body injuries through the season too. He was just really beat up. The Packers went like extremely run heavy. They ended up finishing the season bottom 3 in pass rate over expectation. So to me, that's just something that's very obviously going to regress. We're going to see more pass volume in Green Bay this year. And that makes Love just a really, really easy value when he's going as whatever he is, like the QB 18 to QB 20. In most of these drafts, he's just like the most obvious, like he's going to beat his ADP and finish as like a low end QB1 that I've ever seen pretty much. And yeah, I mean, Matt LaFleur does a lot of these similar kind of Mick Shanahan things that we get out of this coaching tree normally. He loves splitting volume and routes up between his wide receivers in frustrating ways. But I mean, the total sum of the passing production that Jordan Love's going to benefit from is at least one kind of easy way to take advantage of that this year in fantasy.
Yeah, I agree a lot. I think especially you talk about if you're stacking, like there's a lot of guys you can draft after Love to stack with. And you can, double tap Lovecraft right there at the turn. You can get Romeo Dobbs later. You can get Dontavian Wicks later. Like you can still get some decent stacking partners that you're semi confident in. And you look at the Packers, like we talked about last year, how when Love was hurt, I was kind of like a down year for them relative to the year before. Like it was just not as smooth of a year. They were 7th in yards per game and 8th in points per game last year. In a down year, 7th in yards per game, 8th in points per game. So we talk about if they could be better, we're talking about a potential top 5 offense here. Like there's a lot of upside. And they're all priced cheap, like Jaden Reed's wide receiver 42, Matthew Golden wide receiver 44, Tucker Kraft. It's like tight end 12 ADP. Like these guys are not priced extremely high, so I think there's a lot of upside, especially if maybe one of them gets hurt. We talked about one of them emerges as a clear top target. It could just be a clusterfuck again, where it's like, all right, you get some good weeks, but you're not super confident in any guy on a weekly basis. But there's also, especially best ball, like you want those big weeks. So I like the Packers offense. I like drafting them too. But that's it. We talked about our late round strategy. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff today, almost an hour just on the anatomy of a league winner. Thank you again for coming on, guys. Thank you again for listening. Anyone who's seeing this, you're going to have to see it through Ryan retweeting it, which I'm going to make sure that he's going to have to do it because I got about 1,000 followers on my second account right now. So those of you who are following me there already at Guru FF World, thank you. Appreciate it. We're going to keep posting there until we get the main account back, if ever. If not, we're getting back to 40K one way or another, and then we're going to keep going all the way until forever. I'm in it for good. I'm not letting an account change bring me down. I'm in it for the love of the game. So thank you for following me. Thank you to the patrons. You guys have been keeping me sane this past week, where I've been freaking out about my account. At least I've had a really strong core base, and I really appreciate you guys for supporting me. If you guys want to join the Patreon, we have the newsletter weekly in season, so that's going to be coming up. $1 for the newsletter. It's really cheap. Patreon.com/GuruFantasyWorld. Make sure you're following Ryan on Twitter if you're not already. I don't know what the hell rock you're living under. At RyanJ_Heath. If you guys want to subscribe to Fantasy Points, I would recommend that as well. Great data suite. Been using that even more ever since I got access to it. Anything else you want to plug, Ryan?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it, man. But yeah, everybody, as David said, make sure you go give him a follow on that new Twitter account. I'm where I always am. You can find all my written work on fantasypoints.com. For the Dynasty heads, you can find me on Dynasty Points on the Fantasy Points YouTube channel, live every Tuesday night at 9:45 Eastern Time with Jacob Sanderson and Thomas Tipple. Come check that out. That's pretty much it. But yeah, thanks so much for having me, David. It was a good time.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your beach vacation in York.
Well, I will do, man.
All right, guys. Take it easy. Have a good one.